Welcome to Data and Marketing Nation, the podcast that keeps busy professionals like you up to date on all things connecting data and marketing. My name is Dimitri Visnadi, and I'll be talking with experts to help uncover innovations, ideas, and insights. So let's go! Hello everybody, and today I'm joined by Nina Meinel, Senior Data Scientist at Spinger Nature. Welcome, Nina.
Thank you, and I'm really looking forward to actually have my talk with you.
Yeah, I'm very happy that you're joining because I know that you love the world of data, you love the world of marketing, and bringing both of them together, I think is always exciting. And have someone like you to have a conversation, I think that's very interesting. But before we get started, can you maybe tell me a little bit about yourself?
So I have been in the marketing and data science world already quite for some time. It feels like ages, just because I have been working in market research for almost 10 years. And there you get to know all questions clients have in terms of marketing. And you have also a lot of different data there. And after that, I actually had some work in the insurance area, where I also focus most of the time on the marketing side, especially on the application forms for insurances, which is really interesting as well to do there some kind of data science work. And now I do work for Springer Nature, which is a publisher and the scientific industry, and they are also work for the marketing area and support my colleagues there with the data as well with the marketing side.
Very exciting. And to learn little bit more about Springer Nature, what can we think about? What are they publishing basically?
So I'm sure you have seen one of the journals, the Nature portfolio. That is a really kind of important and one. And then you also have the BMC, that's Biomed Central. And I think for all the German people, the Springer Verlag, so to say, is actually also one of the biggest publisher in terms of scientific books and also scientific research. So anything about kind of scientific fields, that is something you can find within the publishing industry here.
And that's basically what you have been working on lately, right? You have been
Yes.
working on the publishing side and how the whole customer journey works, right?
Yes.
Please share some more. Can you give me a little bit about what was that project about? I know it involves attribution, but before, let's say, jumping into the attribution, maybe give us some background, the whole project. How is the customer journey basically, or the user journey?
So within a kind of a publisher or within Springer Nature, you do have actually the product is your website, and on your website you can do several things. You can research an article, but what is kind of even more important for us, you can submit a paper. And this submission process, or this journey, how an author gets to our site, what kind of information they are reading, and how they move from one kind of information on the website to another. This is kind of really unique and something we need to understand. It's kind of product-wise, the understanding, but it's also from a marketing perspective. It's kind of when to use which type of marketing channel, where do you retarget, and so on, until someone really submits a paper. And the thing is that we just don't have that user journal just for kind of one of the brands. We have it for all of the brands, and we have it for the different journals within the brands, because Nature is kind of a big umbrella, and underneath there are a lot of different journals going into really different directions, and you kind of need to bring the data together, and then you kind of need to understand it, and then you try to kind of follow the journey and also kind of recommend kind of things to your colleagues so that they can work with the analysis and really kind of change, kind of guided by data, a little bit the way they work.
Okay. So basically in your project, talked a little bit about, again, the user journey. It's important to understand the data, to really have a look at it. But what was your goal on this project? What did you try to achieve?
So the goal was really to give something to the colleagues, and that meaning that they really have something on their hand so that they can play around with. It's not just an ad hoc analysis we do and then we kind of have it on paper. It is really the aim to have this data-driven way more into the organization, and also kind of to make the colleagues aware that there is data and the data is supporting them, and that there is something like a tool you can then use later on to actually feed their own kind of marketing tools, because everyone is using marketing tools to kind of define the rule sets and so on. And it's really the aim to kind of also feed the tools with information so that they can work just better.
And so in this case, you try to get people to submit the journal, to submit a paper for the journal. And basically, to rephrase my question, so you're trying to get people to submit the journal, but how long does that journey last, and what are the components of the journey?
So the journey is really long. I think that's the longest kind of user journey I have ever kind of also seen. So usually it takes up to 6 or 10 months until someone really submits. And if you think about it, it makes totally sense because it's just not a simple decision. You need material to it. You need to read other articles. You need to write something down. And then the other thing is that every kind of journal has a very specific format. So it needs to be in a really standard way so that they can process it. And that's all kind of information you need to gather. You need to kind of really set it up. And that's why the journey is really long. So the people stay with our products for a long time. And what usual kind of touch point is that the users, for example, read articles. Of course, they need to do. Then they look up what are guidelines for submissions, for example.
So basically, as you said, it's a very long journey. And the journey starts with someone that wants to write a paper, but before they write it, they basically have to inform themselves. So they start reading other papers, they start to read some more content. At some point, they want to get into the publishing the paper, so they start reading about the about section, they start reading about the guidelines. And then at some point, once, let's say, they are working on the paper, then they start filling out the form and trying to apply for it, right?
Yes, correct.
So very different to, let's say, e-commerce business where people have very short customer journeys and are very strongly impacted by the brand. In this case, brand is probably a big impact. However, the journey itself of publishing, as you said, takes, I think, 6 to 10 months, right?
Yes, that's very different. And it's maybe a little bit more in terms of really doing an application form. So, for example, for an energy contract or, for example, for an insurance. I think for some type of insurances, it also takes longer than just a couple of minutes to fill out a form and so on. Yeah, that's a bit similar.
And who pushed this project? Was it the marketing team that said, hey, we need to understand how people are basically coming to publish them, or who's the stakeholder behind that?
It's marketing. So we have kind of marketing and strategy and operation roughly and into analytics. And it's mainly the strategy team who kind of pushes that one because for them, it's like really a huge thing for their budgeting, for example, to understand the channels and to understand how much kind of to spend with and how effective they are. So that's a kind of a very first thing that you can use that attribution model for. It's really this overall strategic view, adding some information to it. No.
And what tools basically are you using to track the data?
So we have a complete setup in Google Analytics. So we use the usual Google stack to actually set up the tracking and as well do the analysis. And as we own the data, we can also then, of course, use the tracking data with any other tool to actually do some kind of coding programming with it.
So most things will be done, let's say, in the Google environment, and I assume some notebooks that you use. And
Yes, yeah.
so what's the challenging part? Because especially I know from my experience, I feel like Google data, again, it always depends on if it's, I think, high volume in terms of, let's say, e-commerce business, but I think you probably also have lots of volume and Google data looking into every session a user had. You have to stitch them together. You have challenges like tracking the user the correct way. How was that like?
So the thing is, the tracking is already set up for quite some time. So you have some knowledge from the history, what works and what works not. And the other thing is that for what makes it a little bit more complicated is that you don't have only one product. So each channel is a product. And for each channel, the tracking can be a little bit different. So if you would look to an overall brand, for example, you need to understand what type of tracking is implemented on which site. And what also happens that if you have breaks in time, for example, if you do campaigns and so on, sometimes it's coded more obvious, and sometimes coding is just like not as nice for a data scientist. So that means you need to do a lot of coding and labeling of data to really work with it. But the good thing is that we already have the reporting in place for quite some time. So there is already some kind of data cleaning done for it. And the other thing is that the marketing, they know their websites really well already. They know the product, and that's why they already have KPIs for like different parts of it, and you just can reuse the things. So it's not that you're reinventing the whole wheel. So we have a lot of experience in the reporting already, and that's where we wanted to go one more step.
Two questions. There's very different, but first one is, do you also have challenges with, let's say, spillover, where maybe you mentioned every journal is their own product, and if maybe marketing invests in one product, but maybe users visit that journal, but
Yes, that's something we also look into, that we don't cannibalize each other. So this is something we definitely look into, but right now we do not use the attribution to kind of figure that out. We look more into how the numbers are changing over time when we do certain things, or we also do a bit of A and B testing to see if we do that for a couple of weeks, what happens with those numbers. But then we do not look into something like the submission rate. We look more into the session counts or how many users visited a specific part on the website. So we really combine the different information you would get out of reporting, attribution, and A/B testing.
And when you started the project, did you use any, let's say, project management strategies or tools? And by that, basically, I mean, especially when you work with customer data and customer journeys, some people like to do user mapping, basically, and that's really, let's say, the emotional level. What's going through someone who wants to submit? What are their steps? And then once you figure that out with your stakeholders, you try to get the data that supports that.
Yeah. So what we start with as analysts is we do the journey ourselves. So we really go to the very specific websites and we do a lot of kind of testing. So we see, okay, is there maybe a switch in trend? Is it easy to find it? Do I find the button where I'm going to go to the submission system, for example? So we do kind of put our own kind of customer hat on and start doing the journeys ourselves. This is one thing. We do talk to a lot of marketing people to kind of understand their experience already, because there is already things in place like retargeting and so on. And we just ask them, why are you doing this and so on. And we are asking for their pains, for example. So what are they missing? And then we do organize ourselves in kind of weekly boards where we have task for task what we do. And what we usually have is that we have some kind of very fast communication channel for our stakeholders. So what are they kind of so yeah, that's kind of getting in touch with them. And what we also have is a lot of in-between presentations to discuss the results. Does it make sense? And does that add up? So just for example, for the submissions, users do not submit on mobile. So we needed to decide if we take out the mobile data completely. And for this, we use just kind of regular calls to kind of go through that type of decisions and to discuss it. And I think with every single kind of call, everyone is learning something. And that's a good point. Yeah. And also just for documentation, we do use like the tool we use to kind of set up our whole analysis. I would say it's 10% of code and the rest is documentation. So we also put in the decisions, why we do something and so on, so that later on we still know what we did. So this is kind of our way of working.
I really like that because it really emphasizes that those projects, they're not a stakeholder has an idea, goes to the analyst and says, hey, I need that data, do some magic to it basically, and present me the results. It's a very long process and it's a journey even for stakeholder, but also the data professional in this case. And it's going back and forth and telling them, look, this is what I see. And they might say, hey, that's not what I think should happen, and it's really trying to understand each other from both sides. And again, it's something that doesn't happen within one or two calls, but it's a long process, and people have to know that.
The process is as long as someone submits a paper, because I'm on that project already for a year now. And it also is a lot of training of people behind it, because I cannot just model something, get up with the solution and kind of throw it over the fence. What we really do is later on we do like really workshops. We have Miro boards prepared where we really go in a moderator style to the results. We show them nice things, recommendations. We really ask a lot for feedback. And that's kind of the only way how you can bring the results into the organization. So we're done with the modeling already for ages, but it takes really time to also bring it into the organization so that they use it. And that is something you should never forget as working as a data scientist or an analyst. You need to keep on really bringing the results into the organization.
Very interesting. And as it's an attribution project, let's just talk a little bit about the attribution model itself, because I think most people are familiar with attribution and they always think about the simple last click, first click, linear, and so on. And there's always the magic of data driven or some machine learning based. What approach did you use?
So as we have a Google Stack, we of course have the last click model as well. We do use that one for the reporting, and for the reporting, it's really good. And what we actually did is we kind of prepared our tracking data. We cleaned it a lot. I already mentioned that we took out mobile. And after doing some descriptive work, we also applied a kind of a model evaluation. And there we were kind of really open to what we have out there. And for each kind of cookie, we know the journey of and you can aggregate the journey a little bit more. And what we did is we used a very simple logistic regression where we can kind of forecast if someone submits or will not submit. And this is our baseline model. So it's the most easiest one, and we would always be better than this. So this is our aim. And then we used kind of machine learning approaches like the random forest, the XGBoost. We trained decision trees, but we also went into a direction which is called LSTM, which also has the opportunity to add the time component. So how does a user goes to kind of which touch point when? And it also gives you more flexibility in the labeling of the media sources and the campaign names, for example, because you don't need to label or group it. It kind of does it themselves because it has some kind of an NLP component and kind of would come up with hidden layers in the back. So the whole data preparation part would be less. And it's actually good. It's performing quite well, but it's almost impossible for interpretation. That's also the reason why we tried it out, but in the end, we did not use it because there is almost no way to really do an interpretation with it. And as the marketing colleagues really interested in the interpretation, we used kind of the next best model, and that was an XGBoost. So it performs well. We can predict if someone is going to submit or not. And based on this one, we can also use really nice tools for interpretation. And interpretation is really easy. So you can kind of really do some recommendation and decision rules just on the visuals. And it's also easy for the marketing colleagues to understand them. And that's the way we kind of use it. We do a machine learning model on it. It's way more sophisticated than last click. But later on, by using this explainable AI, it's called, we can really show them, see if you increase the marketing pressure of, for example, SEA, then you can get this more of people submitting a paper. And this is really nice because they can use it directly for budgeting. So you can even put in return on investment behind the numbers by playing around with the data. And that's exactly what they kind of need.
Wow, that's a lot that you said. Let me just go back a second to the point where you talked about the model itself, and you mentioned a few of them. However, what interests me the most, the input that you give to those models. Is it usually, I don't know, a customer journey? So, I don't know, a list of touch points they had, and from that you predict if they convert or not? Or what was the input?
It depends very much. So if you go with a logistic regression, or even if you go with the random forest and the XGBoost, what you would do is you would really aggregate the data. So you would look on a 10 months journey of a user, and you would really simply have for each user one line which says I had 6 touch points with an email, I have 6 touch points with reading an article, for example. So you would totally ignore the time. That is something you would do. And by this, you can still see the more pressure, the higher the submission probability. So you can still really do the interpretation with that. What you do not get out of this is when happens something in the journey. But this is something you can still do through descriptives. So you can still describe on a descriptive level the journey and can add this information. And both in combination just gives you exactly what you need. And like there are more sophisticated models like this LSTM model. And really you have for each cookie, you have every single touch point with a timestamp on it. And even with the LSTM model, you could predict for each step in time a probability that someone submits. And I think it's more appropriated if you have a small time frame. If you have such a long journey as we do, it's not as appropriated. So it just goes up and down too much. So I think it's really a little bit a matter of the industry where you kind of use that. But it also gives a lot of information. So if you're just interested in that probability, I think this is also an interesting model, but just not sufficient in our case.
Okay. And you also talked a little bit about model evaluation. How do you evaluate the performance of your attribution model? Because
So what we wanted is we wanted to kind of optimize kind of the hit that we can really predict that someone submits. And this is the so-called recall. And that is really the one we looked for. It's not we didn't want it to kind of predict everything. We wanted to predict our submitters. So that's the one we want to identify. And that's something we focused on, identifying the submitters. And they are not as much in our data, so it's not that, 50% of our users submit a paper. It's just a much smaller size.
okay. And then was a very interesting part that you mentioned was about simulating and the simulation effect, basically, so that the marketeers actually have, let's say, I don't want to call it a tool. I don't know if it's a tool, but it's a way so they can say, hey, if we invest a little bit more, what would be the output? How can I imagine that? Did you start doing that in a notebook and then you just run it over and then you discuss the results? Did you even build a little interface?
So the idea is in a notebook, and then what is done currently, we do have a dashboard on top of it. And the idea is that so you have that model, it's an XGBoost in the back. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to use that model and kind of simulate different scenarios. So for example, our colleagues have the idea that they want to put all their money on SEA and do nothing else. And they can test that very specific scenario now. They can kind of say that 100% of the budget really goes to SEA, for example, and then it will show them how much submitters they would get from it. And what we do is we actually use our kind of current status of our cookies, and we see where are they in the journey. Are they in the beginning? Are they in the middle of the journey? Or are they already kind of submitted? And then we would do what marketing colleagues would do. We would start kind of targeting and retargeting. And what we do is we use the XGB results to actually recalculate the submission if we would increase the pressure of marketing, for example, or increase the pressure of a specific retargeting campaign. And what happens? How many move from kind of the starting site to the submission site? So how many can we catch? And that is how we kind of give them a tool so that they understand how much is needed to really get maybe, a very specific number of more submissions.
So now they have this tool basically, and you mentioned before collaboration and stakeholder participation is so important in this whole project overall. But now they have a tool like this. What was their reaction? Because I could imagine now it's not just looking, let's say, at a Google Analytics anymore, but now you educated them, but even yourself, on the whole customer journey, and now you have a tool where you can start playing things, What was their reaction?
So we have like different setups here. So what we do first, so we have workshops with always a group of like 5, 6 colleagues, and it's a couple of workshops you do. So you repeat it. And so we discuss a bit on the outcome, how they would use it, and if they would have a tool, how it should look like. And in there, you already could see a pattern of answers. And we used that kind of outcome already to adjust a little bit the visual. So for example, the marketeers also think in the journey, and they think in the sections: awareness, consideration, decision. And that's kind of why we also in the visuals kind of having those sections, because that is how you kind of look at the funnel. That's kind of a natural thing you do. So we kind of also updated that one. And now we are in a phase where we have the prototype ready, and then we have a few colleagues we talk to one-on-one. This goes to the right direction. Are we kind of missing something totally? And we collected that feedback already. And that was also really valuable, because it was like, oh, I'm going to use it, but that group is not going to use it. So what are we doing now? And so there's a difference between strategy and operation. Strategy needs something else than operation would do. And the next phase is really having the groups again together, so they can play around with the tool and they can tell us the wishes. Are they understanding what we mentioned there, and so on? And then if we have that ready, we start with the pipeline. So we decided to go first with the visual, let them test it, and then set up really the data pipeline behind. I'm not doing that one, fortunately, so we have a separate team for that. And when this is done, we will have a phase where we would add more things, something like countries, something like very specific subgroups, and so on. But this comes, I think it will be one more year of work until really it is finalized, where we can say, okay, this is now our tool. So we are on the starting point, but yes, I think it will still take a journey for us to come up with our tool we can work with.
Especially when you have those customer journeys that are that long, as you just mentioned. That's why you also
Yeah,
have to wait, I guess.
that's true. But the good thing is that you don't need to adjust it too often, because the behavior doesn't change that frequently as maybe other e-commerce kind of behaviors. So it's not like an offer is going to change the behavior totally. No.
To recap that whole project a little bit, what do you think were the main challenges that you and your team has faced?
I think the main challenge was the data, because we have like so many different kind of journals, and you always, I think, run into a data mistake. I think that's just naturally. So that was a good experience, but it's of course also a complication. And the other thing is to get like the right people involved. So setting up the groups, knowing the groups, how they use it. I think this is also something, because you do not work with all of the people for the whole time of the project together. So you bring people in and out, in and out. And I think this is also a bit of the challenge, that you always need to bring in the right people, and you kind of need to distribute the information. I think that is a challenge, that, yes, you just get the communication and to get the right people together.
I enjoyed it. I had a smile for a second when you said that you or someone made a mistake, and your voice kind of went down. But the thing is, it's totally normal. We all make mistakes, and especially working with data, it's so hard. I mean, you can slice it, dice it, you forget a specific, and you have to go back. And I think, especially the good thing is in your setup where you have those constant communication, it's easy where you can say on one meeting, hey, we did a mistake, we have to go back 1 week and redo that part. I feel like often analysts, there's always, I feel like this imposter syndrome. There's always a thing that has to be perfect. I have to live up to the expectation of the stakeholders, but it's a process, and failing
Yes,
is part of it, and making mistakes is far from failing, I think.
I totally agree. So working with data, you will never be able to see the full range of what is possible in there. And there's like tiny little details which can make your life pretty hard. But it's a learning curve. That's why I also like working with the data, because you get to know it better, better, and better. So it's like riding a bike. You start with it, and then you get better, 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 and better. And then in the end, you are a professional mountain biker or something like that. Yeah.
Very nice analogy. And thinking about, let's say, if that wouldn't be the case, that you have the customer journeys, I think it's always unique to every business. And especially once I used to work with a client in the travel industry. And what we did try to do there was selling different types of products. They were selling airplane tickets, they were selling train tickets, but they were also selling, let's say, vacational packages. And the beauty of analyzing the customer journey was that we could see that train tickets basically were sold out basically within a week of time. Someone has one or two maybe touch points. They check out, oh, this is a train maybe just to go home or travel somewhere on the weekend. Does the price and the timing fit for me? I'm going to buy it. The train, the plane had a little bit longer journey where people maybe 2 months before the flight or 3 months, they had a check. Again, they didn't have that many touch points either, because usually they check if the price is fine and then they convert. However, what was fun to see, the vacational packages, they had a lot longer time. It was, I think, also between 6 to 8 months. And people had a lot of sessions because I think they were comparing different destinations. They were looking into it. So it really depends on the business and probably also on the product to look into the customer journey. And I think that's one of what I really liked that you highlighted during this conversation, is that really understanding the data, mapping it out, having those conversations with the marketing people, because you try to model human behavior. And I think understanding the journey is such a fundamental part in the whole project.
It does make sense to go to the data first. You always need to get an understanding of the product you look into. And that is, it doesn't matter if it's a website or an app, or maybe even if kind of that you buy something in a store. It's like you really need to try it out and also understand the different ways. It makes, for example, sense that people do not submit on mobile because they don't have the documents on mobile. So therefore, it's kind of also a sense check for you. And also, if you try out something on mobile, it's really different. So, and I like that part of the data analysis, that you can really kind of look into the product as well as it is.
Oh, that's interesting. One last, let's say, fun question. I know that you're really into, again, the marketing and the data science of it. What other kind of projects are you currently, maybe reading on, interested in, getting your hands on, or maybe even working on? What do you think is currently, let's say, a hot topic in your marketing data world?
So what is also really interesting, what is for me a totally different kind of analysis, is kind of doing a forecast for how much impressions a very specific page will have in the future. Because of course, we, as an owner of a website, you also have spaces for advertisement. And so we can kind of forecast that better. And that's also really good for budgeting again. And I really like it because so we have so many different websites, and it's for me a new kind of learning curve, kind of having different type of analysis I never did before. That is one thing, and it's almost applicable to everything, just because it's so unique. So I think almost every website has a space where they can place an advertisement. So I like that kind of having always a learning curve to it.
I think that's part of being a data scientist, data analyst. I think people are always curious. They always want to see what's actually happening and how does the data support it.
Yes, and marketing never runs out of questions. So that is also really nice. And if you combine it with the product side, you can even kind of product optimization together with marketing. I think both hand in hand is anyway kind of a great combination.
Nina, I think it was a great conversation. I learned a lot, and especially the last thing you said about this project about forecasting impression. I think that could maybe give us some content maybe for another episode in the future. But for now, I want to thank you for sharing the project that you have worked on. One final question. If there are other, let's say, crazy data marketing people, can they reach out to you? If so, what's a good platform for reaching out to you?
So if someone would like to contact me, LinkedIn is kind of the best platform for me. So I'm kind of really responsive as well. So it's the only social media channel for me, I would call it.
Well, I think like most people nowadays, I think LinkedIn is becoming always a stronger platform.
Yes.
But again, Nina, thank you so much again. I had a really pleasure to have you here on the podcast, and I learned even a lot from your conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you as well for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Data and Marketing Nation. If you want to put your marketing data to action, head over to vanalize.com. I wish you a wonderful day, and see you on the next episode.